How do you make the world a better place? Do you try and get everyone to sign a petition? Do you give everyone free milk teas? Do you become a demon slayer and vow to kill the king of all demons? It's hard to think about it, right? The world is such a big place. It can be hard to figure out what actions to take. Maybe we should take a step back. We should go back to the drawing board and figure out what the goals should be. Back in 2015, the United Nations General Assembly did exactly that. They created the Sustainable Development Goals. Hello everyone, this is Teacher Diane. I hope everyone is having a delicious lunch. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the video. As you can tell, today's topic is the Sustainable Development Goals. So, what exactly are the Sustainable Development Goals? You can think of them as a blueprint. What's a blueprint exactly? This is a blueprint. When you are trying to build something, it's good to have a plan first. The United Nations General Assembly came together in 2015 to create a blueprint. Their plan was to make the world a better place by 2030. That's just a decade away from now. At this point, you may be wondering, what exactly is the United Nations General Assembly? To quickly summarize, the United Nations General Assembly serves as the main policy-making part of the UN. It's where countries can come together and have discussions on international issues such as peace and security. In the United Nations General Assembly, all member states have equal representation. The United Nations General Assembly's plan to make the world a better place by 2030 has a total of 17 goals. Let's go over them. Alright, today we will be focusing on these two goals: sustainable cities and communities and zero hunger. Let's talk about sustainable cities and communities first. With more and more people moving away from rural areas into cities, it has become important to make our cities better. In 2018, 55% of the world's population lived in cities. By 2050, the urban population is expected to reach 6.5 billion. Unlike rural areas, cities have a lot less space. People live closer together. Thus, having good city planning is vital. So, what are some important things a good city should have? What targets should we be meeting? According to the UN, there are 10 targets in total. Target 1. Safe and affordable housing. Target 2. affordable and sustainable transport systems. Target 3, inclusive and sustainable urbanization. Target 4, protect the world's cultural and natural heritage. Target 5, reduce the adverse effects of natural disasters. Target 6, reduce the environmental impacts of cities. Target 7, provide access to safe and inclusive green and public spaces. Target 8, strong national and regional development planning. Target 9, implement policies for inclusion, resource efficiency, and disaster risk reduction. And Target 10, support least developed countries in sustainable and resilient building. Let's go over some of the targets. The first one is safe and affordable housing. Having good and affordable housing helps keep people safe. In New York City, the average rent for a studio apartment is $2,595 US. That is 74,257.22 new Taiwan dollars per month. The minimum wage is 15 US dollars per hour. If you were a low-income worker, your yearly wage would be around 31,285.74 USD. That's before taxes. The total amount of your rent after a year would be 31,240 USD. As you can see, that is an issue. Even with your entire paycheck, you might not be able to cover rent. That is why many people in New York City live with at least one other person. It is also the reason why homelessness is such a problem. Having affordable housing would lessen the amount of people living on the streets. It would keep more people safe. Reducing homelessness would also help slow the spread of COVID-19. People experiencing homelessness have a higher risk of catching the disease. The second target is having affordable and sustainable transport systems. Taiwan has a good public transport system. In 2019, only half of the world's urban population had convenient access to public transport. Another target is to protect the world's cultural and natural heritage. What does protecting the world's cultural heritage look like? One way to protect cultural heritage is to maintain and preserve historical buildings. By doing that, you are keeping history alive. Instead of just seeing buildings in photos, future generations can actually come to the place. What does preserving natural heritage mean? One example could be seen with the Yellowstone National Park. Wolves are native to this park, but in 1923, humans eliminated them. The ecosystem was negatively impacted because of this. Nothing was stopping the prey animals from decimating the vegetation. Then, in 1995, wolves were reintroduced to the Yellowstone National Park and have successfully reintegrated back into the ecosystem. By doing this, one could say they preserved the natural heritage of the park, as the wolves originally came from there. One way to maintain heritage in a city would be growing plants that have naturally grown there. Parks are a good way to maintain natural heritage. Unfortunately, due to the COVID-19 pandemic, the culture sector has been hit hard and has lost funding. Target 5 is reducing the adverse effects of natural disasters. In order to reduce the adverse effects of natural disasters, you must plan for it. You must understand that a disaster can occur today, tomorrow, or maybe even decades away from now. In Aniyoshi, Japan, this small village was able to use smart town building to keep themselves safe from the 2011 earthquake and the subsequent tsunami. How exactly did they do this? With the help of their ancestors. Aniyoshi has a tsunami stone. Tsunami stones are stones that have warnings carved into them. Many of them are at least a century old. As Itoko Kitahara, a specialist in the history of natural disasters, put it, the tsunami stones are warnings across generations, telling descendants to avoid the same suffering of their ancestors. Aniyoshi's tsunami stone had specific instructions carved into it. Do not build your homes below this point. The previous generation of villagers wrote this down because almost a century ago the village had suffered a devastating tsunami. Villagers had died from the natural disaster. The descendants followed the stone's instructions and rebuilt Aniyoshi higher, allowing them to stay safe when the 2011 earthquake struck. So, a lot of natural disaster planning involves thinking in future terms. Unfortunately, not everyone can just rebuild their cities into safer areas. But there are other ways to reduce the consequences of natural disasters. One such way includes designing earthquake-resistant structures. Although there are no structures that can be entirely immune to damage from earthquakes, the point is to make buildings that can fare better during seismic activity and minimize the loss of life. In places where there are many severe storms or tornadoes, building storm shelters can be a great idea. That way, if people do not have adequate protection during such events, they can go to these places. Less people will die as a result. There are many other ways to decrease the damage from natural disasters. As climate change continues to advance, it will become vital for cities to have natural disaster planning. Okay, now that we've talked about some of the things for sustainable cities and communities, let's talk about zero hunger. So, zero hunger has 3 main points. Number 1, improve access to food. Number 2, end all forms of malnutrition. Number 3, promote sustainable agriculture. Let's talk about food deserts. Definition: an area that has limited access to affordable and nutritious food. In a food desert, the only places that might sell food are corner shops. As you see in this picture of a 7-Eleven, this is a corner shop, also known as a convenience store. Food deserts lack suppliers of fresh foods. It is difficult to get meats, fruits, and vegetables. Instead, the available foods are often processed and high in sugar and fats. In food deserts, food can be very expensive. This photo was taken in northern Ontario. As you can see, it's $43.49. In New Taiwan dollars, it's $947.46. Most residents who live in food deserts have low income and reduced mobility. So, what does reduced mobility mean in this instance? It means that they do not have a car or other convenient means of transportation. Supermarkets and other food suppliers tend to avoid these areas as they are considered not profitable. Before COVID-19, food insecurity was already on the rise. What is food insecurity? It's this. So, food insecurity. Food insecurity. So, the population affected by moderate or severe food insecurity has risen from 2014 to 2018. In 2014, it was 23.2%. In 2018, it's 26.4%. Small-scale food producers are also hit hard by the crisis. It has compromised 40 to 85% of all food producers in developing regions. Let's go over the vocabulary. Pandemic, pandemic. Food system, food system. Climate shock, climate shock. Conflict, conflict. Locust, locust. The COVID-19 implications. The pandemic is an additional threat to food systems. These are the 4 main threats: climate shocks, locust crisis, COVID-19, and conflicts. The COVID-19 pandemic has greatly impacted the food supply chain. A supply chain is all the steps it takes to get the product from its original state to the customer. For example, let's take a look at this chicken. It comes from a farm. To get from the farm to a grocery store to your hands, here are some of the steps it might take to do it. The farmer raises the chicken until adulthood. A driver takes the animal to a meat processing plant. The meat workers process the meat. The meat is then packaged. Another driver takes the meat and delivers it to the grocery store. The employees at the grocery store place the meat onto the shelves. Eventually, someone comes in, picks up the meat, and pays the cashier. All these steps are parts of a supply chain. If one step is missed, then the meat does not get into the customer's hands. This is why COVID-19 has had such a huge impact on the food industry. It may also be the reason why you have seen news of other countries running out of food in their grocery markets. It does not necessarily mean that there is no food, but rather it isn't getting to the right place. To get anything from one place to another, you need humans. Let's look back at the example. The first step had the farmers. The second step had the drivers. The third step had the factory workers. The fourth step has another set of drivers. The final step has employees at the supermarket. If any of these groups of people got sick, then the whole process slows down. It could possibly stop. All of these people are at risk of getting COVID-19. Out of these groups, the risks are at its highest with the meat workers. Why? In many of these meat processing plants, it is hard to take COVID-19 safety measures. Many employees work near each other. It is cold and damp inside, which makes it a perfect environment for the coronavirus to stay and spread. There isn't a lot of space between each employee. If one employee gets sick, it can spread throughout the place like a wildfire. In America, this happened. So many meat workers got sick that production slowed to a halt. Quite a few of these places had to shut down because they became huge sources for the disease. This had a domino-like effect on everyone. Meat processing plants were closed down. That meant that drivers could not pick up or deliver meat. Farmers had all these livestock in which they had to spend money to keep feeding. On the other end of the equation, many grocery stores and restaurants were not receiving meat. Some places even ran out of stock. While some farmers could do the work of the meat plant workers, many of them could not, as they did not have the equipment or the manpower to do so. Even if they did, most farmers do not sell food directly to the customers themselves. In America, that is not the standard practice. The majority of Americans buy food from the supermarkets. And quite a few of Americans do not live near any farms. To make the food wastage worse, food service supply, which is food sold to restaurants, is separated from the grocery store supply, food sold to everyday people. Back in the spring, many restaurants bought less food as a result of having fewer customers. Due to a problem in the supply chain, food that was produced for restaurants could not be sold to everyday people. That meant that gallons of milk and piles of vegetables were left to waste while grocery stores were empty. Thus, you have an issue where you have food, but people are not getting the food. Fortunately, the food supply chain has somewhat recovered since then and is still holding up. Thank you all for listening to me talk today. I hope you have a great lunch and you have a great day. Goodbye.